if you have a character where you just hand them the strength they need, like, they say a prayer or do a magic kind of request, and boom, they've got all the strength or the power they need to fight the battle. It kind of diminishes the character in a way. I mean, I'm sure someone could find that in a strain of story, but the thing that more consistently appeals is when someone really has to seek it out and do something, fight it out until they develop what they need to to become something greater. And that actually was, Jesus' message, not so much Paul's. And I think that is one of the areas where it was hijacked. Once I had kind of pulled back from a specific religious way of kind of looking at the divine or the nature of the grand consciousness, God, what have you, I was looking at it more from a kind of physics standpoint, also in terms of storytelling, my own narrative, because of course we draw from our own experience, or how a character in a story might examine those things, and how, outside of our perspective, our kind of ticking clock, sort of linear time perspective, where time has a beginning and an end, if a person backs up and looks at the lifespan of a human being and their choices in their story, there's kind of like a worm where it starts at one end is the beginning. You're born, and then, as move in different directions in life, you turn to the left or you turn to the right, you can kind of see how those choices affect one's direction. And then at some point it ends, because at least in the physical terms, you die and you disintegrate into dust. But when you're looking at it from that outside perspective, and you go back into any slice in that kind of worm or chain, a different choice can kind of change entirely the structure of how that looks on the outside when you get to the end point. Maybe it's one choice or a series of choices. But that's what kind of a non-linear look at time can do. You can also take, maybe the end and bring it back to the beginning, if you will. You can cut that in half. And when it comes to telling stories, we've seen that too, where you're starting kind of at the midpoint, and you begin to see how those choices might happen in the end, but then you go back and you see what was the cause of those choices at the end, because you see how everything began. So there's all kinds of ways by looking at how non-linear life can look when you look at it from the divine perspective, how that can affect the nature of storytelling as well. And when it comes to what a life can teach us, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, how you slice it can have a lot to do with the lessons that people learn too, the focus that's put on certain things. And that again showed me why it's so important that there's nuance to moral choices, because we have before us, while we're in the current slice that we're in, and we're kind of creating this chain or worm that will ultimately be the life we've lived, the variety of choices that we have, the gray in some of them, can take us in any one of a number of different directions. And well, from a time travel perspective, that brings in all kinds of potential alternate realities that we could, or our characters could inhabit, by looking at which direction their choices are going to take them, and what other intersections they might have. Because of course the whole time those choices are being made, there's interactions and intersections with other people's lives, and how those things are impacted and affected. And one of the things that they showed me is that this is like, it's kind of a weird thing to think about how a higher dimensional perspective looks when you're standing outside of time. Kind of goes again back to this sort of idea of moral perspective, and that there is a natural reality to how we connect with and interact with the world and the morality of our choices. It's a lot more about cause and effect. You know, when we connect with someone and we're kind, that has a ripple effect on all of these potential outcomes and choices in this story. If we choose to be intimate with someone and it's cavalier, you know, that may not be a bad experience for either person, but it has a ripple effect into, you know, how they interpret maybe that relationship or ongoing relationships, or if it becomes habitual, how they treat relationships in general versus, you know, how maybe more conservative people might be when it comes to really evaluating why they're going to engage in their intimate connections and weighing them out, you know, the emotional bonds or the drama that may ensue. You know, some people want to be more careful about, you know, navigating those lines with the relationships that they have. So all of those things affect the tapestry of this sort of outside time perspective, and it affects the tapestry of our moral choices as well. And they're not necessarily a kind of going to result in us being punished. They're going to result in you having outcomes that are just natural extensions of all of these choices that the characters in the stories can make. There's a lot, again, there that one can imagine and play with in terms of, you know, the timeline, whether we're talking time travel stories or just more conventional ones, that really affect the outcome of where everything winds up turning out in the end. If I were to say something kind of controversial on the basis of what that kind of looks like, this is one of the reasons why I think that the Apostle Paul, when I was digging into that, has kind of hijacked Jesus' message, because he kind of turns moral strength into passive grace, you know, in a lot of his message. You know, it's not what you do, it's just what you believe. And, you know, the answers to what to do, the actions we take, the moral choices we make are like a curse or a burden. And he referred to the law as a burden or a curse. Whereas Jesus' actual message was that there was real virtue in following the divine law or the will of God, the will of the Father, and that's something we should do, because it affects outcomes. It affects what we build out of that chain I was talking about earlier. And I think most Christian movies fail because they're afraid of showing a real messy human struggle, at least to a certain extent, and seeing that as actually great. It's really great that we get to have these messy struggles where we get to try all these avenues and these pathways, and correct for them. You know, even the failures, the scars that we get to take on, or the characters we write about and the scars that they take on, they can make you stronger. They can make you stronger as an observer, but they can make you stronger if you're a character going through those things. And that is the point of the journey. That is the point of the suffering, if you will, because it's those ropey scars, or the fiber we build by going through those things that, you know, build us the kind of muscle or endurance or strength we need to have to face bigger challenges that are another part of that hero story, you know. And so it is what we do. It's not just some kind of, if you have a character where you just hand them the strength they need, like, you know, they say a prayer or do a magic kind of request, and boom, they've got all the strength or the power they need to fight the battle. It kind of diminishes the character in a way. I mean, I'm sure someone could find that in a strain of story, but the thing that more consistently appeals is when someone really has to seek it out and do something, fight it out until they develop what they need to become something greater. And that actually was, Jesus' message, not so much Paul's. And I think that is one of the areas where it was hijacked. It's one of the things that I got as a writer out of kind of my exit from that particular perspective. It's not that I just threw everything away. I was actually seeing things that were more powerful as the deconstruction was happening in what some of these characters, namely in this case was, Jesus' message or the Jewish roots that he sprang from, and that idea that there is something of a divine law and an opportunity to test it, to move into it, to kind of push against it and see where the costs lie and everything. That kind of view that the moral law or the divine law is just some rule book. I think that actually comes out of kind of a paradigm that I've left behind as well. That I think, even again, as I said before, even if you don't have a particular religious framework, there are kind of realities, and some might call them divine, but then others may say there's nothing divine about it. It's not supernatural, but it just springs naturally from nature to, see that being truthful is better than being a liar, or, being well connected to parents with good intentions and doing what they're instructing you to do is probably going to lead in a good direction, and not trying to covet or take from what your neighbor has, or be embittered, but to be encouraging of other people. All of these things, they spring from nature. One can call them kind of a supernatural or meta reality in that sense because of how much goodness they can spread when they're broadly applied, not just by one person, but by a community and by a nation or what have you. It makes for better everything. And that, in a sense, is kind of supernatural because the sum is greater than its parts. But that was one of the areas of hijacking that I was quite happy to see, and it actually fits well into constructing stories and narratives that kind of, come up with something great that comes out of the gray in life. And in that respect, I mean, some of these old laws, like going back to, the stories of Moses and Ten Commandments, what have you, they're not quite as outdated as we might think when we don't you kind of religiousify them to make up a totally fake word. We don't have to make a religion out of them. We just have to kind of realize that all the way back then there was this effort to extract from the fiber of nature itself the divine element that makes that a reality. What these principles are that make for great journeys and that aid the process of the journey. When you make better choices, better outcomes happen.